The history of the United States is a vast continuum of human migration, cultural transformation, political evolution, and social struggle that began long before the formation of the modern nation. Long before European contact, the North American continent was home to complex societies with established political, economic, and spiritual systems. Indigenous peoples occupied the land from the Atlantic to the Pacific, developing agricultural networks, trade routes, and governance structures that reflected deep relationships with the natural environment. In the fertile valleys of the Mississippi, mound-building civilizations like the Mississippians constructed large ceremonial centers, while in the Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans built intricate cliff dwellings and irrigation systems that demonstrated advanced engineering and social organization. The Iroquois Confederacy in the Northeast established a model of representative governance that would later influence European settlers' ideas of federalism. When European explorers arrived in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, they encountered a continent already populated with millions of people speaking hundreds of languages and sustaining diverse cultures. The arrival of Europeans initiated a period of profound upheaval. Spanish, French, Dutch, and English expeditions sought wealth, resources, and territory, setting in motion patterns of colonization that would reshape the hemisphere. Spanish conquistadors established vast empires in the Caribbean, Mexico, and the American Southwest, spreading Christianity and European institutions while decimating indigenous populations through warfare, enslavement, and disease. The French focused on trade and alliances, especially in the Great Lakes and along the Mississippi River, developing a fur-based economy deeply intertwined with native societies. The English, arriving later, pursued settlement and agricultural colonization, particularly along the Atlantic coast. The establishment of Jamestown in 1607 marked the beginning of continuous English presence in North America, soon followed by the Pilgrims at Plymouth in 1620, and the growth of other colonies, such as Massachusetts Bay, Maryland, and Virginia. These English colonies, though diverse in origin and purpose, gradually developed shared political and cultural frameworks grounded in English law, Protestant religion, and local self-government. The early colonial period was marked by tension and adaptation. Colonists relied heavily on native knowledge for survival, yet increasingly encroached on indigenous lands. Systems of labor evolved, including indentured servitude and, tragically, African slavery. By the mid-17th century, the transatlantic slave trade had taken root, and enslaved Africans became the backbone of plantation economies in the southern colonies. Over time, these regional economies diverged. The North developed commerce, shipping, and small-scale farming, while the South grew wealthy from tobacco, rice, and later cotton, using enslaved labor. The colonial societies were shaped by constant negotiation between freedom and authority, individualism and community, piety and material ambition. By the 18th century, the British colonies had matured into prosperous settlements with increasing populations and growing confidence. Yet their relationship with Britain became strained as imperial policies sought to consolidate control and extract revenue. The 7 Years' War, known in America as the French and Indian War, left Britain victorious but deeply indebted, leading Parliament to impose new taxes and regulations on the colonies. Colonists, accustomed to a large degree of autonomy, protested these measures under the principle of no taxation without representation. The conflict escalated from political petitions to organized resistance, culminating in violent confrontations such as those at Lexington and Concord. The ensuing Revolutionary War transformed the struggle into a fight for independence. The Declaration of Independence articulated Enlightenment ideals of liberty, equality, and popular sovereignty, asserting that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. The war tested the endurance of the fledgling nation, uniting diverse colonies in a shared cause. Under the leadership of figures such as George Washington, the Continental Army overcame immense hardship, aided by French military and financial support. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 recognized the sovereignty of the United States, marking the birth of a new nation built on Republican ideals. Yet independence did not resolve the fundamental tensions within American society. The new nation faced questions about the balance between state and federal power. the meaning of liberty in a society that tolerated slavery, and the rights of women and indigenous peoples. The Articles of Confederation, the nation's first constitution, proved inadequate to manage these complexities, leading to the Constitutional Convention of 1787. The framers sought to create a system of government capable of preserving liberty while ensuring stability, resulting in the U.S. Constitution, a framework of checks and balances, separation of powers, and federalism. The Bill of Rights soon followed, guaranteeing essential civil liberties. The early republic faced challenges of legitimacy, economic recovery, and national unity. Under Washington's presidency, the government established precedents that shaped the future, creating a national bank, maintaining neutrality in foreign affairs, and asserting federal authority during internal unrest. The rise of political parties reflected deeper divisions over the nation's direction. Federalists favored strong central government and commercial development, while Democratic Republicans championed agrarianism and local autonomy. As the nation expanded westward, driven by the Louisiana Purchase and a belief in manifest destiny, the question of slavery's extension into new territories became the central moral and political issue. The early 19th century saw remarkable growth and transformation. The Industrial Revolution began to reshape the economy, urbanizing parts of the North and spurring technological innovation such as the cotton gin, steamboat, and telegraph. Cultural movements emphasizing individualism, democracy, and reform took root, including abolitionism, women's rights advocacy, and temperance. Yet this progress existed alongside profound injustices. The forced displacement of Native Americans through policies like the Indian Removal Act and the entrenchment of racial slavery as an economic system in the South. The expansion of slavery into new territories fractured national politics. The Missouri Compromise of 1850, and Kansas-Nebraska Act attempted to preserve balance but deepened sectional distrust. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, viewed by the South as a threat to slavery, triggered secession and civil war. The Civil War was the greatest test of the American experiment. It pitted the principles of union and democracy against the institution of slavery and the assertion of state sovereignty. The conflict wrought immense human suffering and destruction, but ultimately preserved the nation and ended slavery. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation reframed the war as a struggle for human freedom, and the Union victory reaffirmed the federal government's supremacy. Reconstruction sought to rebuild the South and integrate freed African Americans into civic life, enshrining equal protection and voting rights in the Constitution. However, resistance, racial violence, and political compromise undermined these gains, leading to a century of segregation and disenfranchisement under Jim Crow laws. As the 19th century closed, the United States emerged as an industrial and global power. Railroads linked the continent, factories multiplied, cities swelled, and immigration from Europe transformed society. The Gilded Age brought unprecedented wealth and innovation, but also stark inequality and labor unrest. Reformers of the Progressive era sought to address these excesses through regulation, social activism, and expanded democracy. The Spanish-American War marked the nation's arrival as an imperial power, asserting influence over territories from the Caribbean to the Pacific. The early 20th century was characterized by optimism and upheaval. Industrialization, immigration, and social reform converged to redefine American identity. The nation's entry into World War I under Wilson reflected both idealism and emerging global responsibility. The post-war period saw cultural dynamism, the Jazz Age, the Harlem Renaissance, and the spread of mass media, but also social tensions, xenophobia, and racial violence. The economic boom of the 1920s ended abruptly with the Great Depression, plunging the country into crisis. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal transformed the role of government, introducing social welfare, labor rights, and financial regulation that reshaped American capitalism. The Second World War galvanized the nation, mobilizing its industrial and military might in the fight against fascism. Victory brought unprecedented global influence, but also new challenges as the Cold War began. The ideological struggle between democracy and communism defined U.S. foreign and domestic policy for decades, from the Marshall Plan to the Korean and Vietnam Wars. Domestically, the post-war years saw prosperity, suburbanization, and the growth of consumer culture, but also social transformation. The civil rights movement challenged the legacy of racial injustice, achieving landmark victories through the leadership of figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and the passage of civil rights legislation. The feminist movement, environmental activism, and demands for equality from other marginalized groups expanded the definition of American freedom. Political upheavals, cultural shifts, and technological change marked the late 20th century. The 1970s brought economic stagnation, political scandal, and a crisis of confidence, followed by a conservative resurgence in the 1980s, emphasizing deregulation, free markets, and strong national defense. The end of the Cold War in 1991 left the United States as the world's sole superpower, but globalization, technological transformation, and ideological polarization presented new challenges. The attacks of September 11, 2001 reshaped foreign and domestic policy, leading to prolonged conflict